New York City, the Big Apple, the city that never sleeps, the 14th biggest city in the world, and second in North America, but still the city with the biggest ego. It is home to the headquarters of the United Nations and is the economic and cultural capital of the world, according to New Yorkers. But it is not the capital of the United States. That honor instead goes to Washington, D.C. So why is that? A lot of countries around the world have capital cities nowhere near as big as the largest cities, which can trip up anyone trying to guess the capital of a given country. For example, the capital of Turkey is not Istanbul, but Ankara. The capital of Canada is not Toronto, it's actually Ottawa. The capital of Australia is not Sydney, but Canberra, etc. So why do some countries do this? For a government of, by, and for the people, wouldn't it make sense to put the capital where most of the people already are? To answer this question, it is really important to understand the history of each respective country. Before 1776 AD, also known as 1 AF, the east coast of North America was settled by lots of European countries, but mostly by Britain, who established/took over settlements that would eventually become some of the largest cities on the eastern seaboard today, including but not limited to New York, Boston, Philadelphia, Baltimore, and Charleston. However, one place that didn't exist back then was Washington, D.C., which sounds like it would make the answer even more complicated, but actually hints at a very important point in the story. You see, when America was first established, it needed a government, and since the internet didn't exist back then and shouting at each other from different cities proved somewhat impractical, the Continental Congress met in different locations throughout the Northeast, most notably Philadelphia, but also Baltimore, Annapolis, and several others, even including New York, which is where the president first lived before the White House was built. Eventually, they decided that even this was pretty dumb, since they were still relying on state militias to protect them, so they decided to establish the District of Columbia, taking away a bit of land from Maryland and Virginia as a compromise between North and South. This allowed Congress to better control its own affairs. And to this day, Washington, D.C., though it may seem to act like it, is actually not a city, but a federal district. This means that its budget and laws are under the control of Congress, since it's where Congress lives. So anything major that happens in D.C. would also likely affect all of that important stuff downtown. So planners need to be very careful in the district. This is why D.C. residents didn't get the right to vote in presidential elections until the 60s, and why D.C.'s license plates say taxation without representation. Now, up in the Great Friendly North, Ottawa is certainly no small city, but it's nowhere near as big as its close neighbor, Toronto. So why is it the capital of Canada? From 1841 to 1867, there was the Colony of Canada, which also moved the capital every time the emperor died every few years, until eventually settling on Ottawa, which, unlike DC, was actually already an established settlement before being chosen as the capital. Because of this, it was Queen Victoria's government who decided on Ottawa, as none of the Canadian officials could agree on a specific place. Ottawa was chosen for two reasons. First, its location, surrounded by dense forest and far from the US border, making it easier to defend. Or, well, maybe in principle. And second, because it was right between the major cities of Ontario and Quebec, making a compromise between East and West. As you'll no doubt remember from my History of Australia video, how could you not remember, it was literally uploaded 2 weeks ago, this is similar to how Canberra was chosen to be the capital of Australia, as it was a compromise between Sydney and Melbourne. Basically, a district was drawn out of the state of New South Wales, and it was decided that a new capital would be built there. At least 160 kilometers away from Sydney, and Melbourne would be the seat of the government while Canberra was being built up. But they agreed not to call it the capital. From 1453 to 1922, the capital of the Ottoman Empire was the city of Istanbul, which nowadays is still the largest city in not just Turkey, but all of Europe, depending on how you count Europe. However, when the Turkish Republic was founded in 1923, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk moved the capital eastward to the city of Ankara, which was the location of the headquarters of Atatürk's resistance movement. Today, Ankara has actually recently surpassed Izmir to become Turkey's second biggest city, so actually they're getting quite up there now. Still quite far behind Istanbul, but still. Brazil also went through a similar process when, in the 60s, they moved their capital from Rio de Janeiro up to the more central Brasilia, something that they'd wanted to do since 1891. Brasilia was founded in 1960 and was built up from scratch as a sort of master planned city, kind of like what was envisioned for Washington, D.C. In the 80s, Nigeria also followed a similar path and moved their capital from Lagos to Abuja, also built from scratch in the center of the country as to not pick sides between the primarily Muslim North and Christian South. So those are some of the stories of how and why some countries have chosen to place their capitals in smaller cities. Basically, a lot of it had to do with a avoiding favoritism. Obviously, there are more countries that do this than the ones I mentioned, but at least in my opinion, these ones were pretty good examples. Thanks for watching this video, and if you enjoyed it, please be sure to give it a like, share it, and subscribe to learn something new every Sunday. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter, @Canubis, for updates, announcements, votes on future videos, and other random thoughts from me. Just thought I'd put it out there.